Essa é uma cabra.
These are your private tools of media.
The boys are waiting for you. Then you know size. I be there.
We can assure you that this propaganda will come to it and hurt him hard. President Mahama accused the previous government of ending the year with a headline inflation of 23.8%, above the IMF target of 18%. This divergence, the president indicated, showed a poor performance of monetary policy. Isn't this the typical story of the glass being either half empty or half full? If one looks at the fact that the COVID and Russia-Ukraine war crisis-driven inflation rose to 54% at the end of 2022 and dropped sharply to 23% at the end of 2023, that's within 12 months. Then a headline inflation of 23% should be seen as a significant positive performance. Of course, not at the medium-term target yet, but the disinflation process is on track. It is also instructive to note that the IMF has an upper band of 22% for inflation for December 2024. This suggests a rather marginal deviation compared to the program target, contrary to what President Mahama wants us to believe. If such a marginal deviation from the disinflation path is bad, then the president is the worst culprit. When his last government deviated from an inflation target of 10.1% by achieving 15.4% at the end of December 2016. For those who are familiar with Ghana's program with the IMF, these minor deviations from the program targets are sometimes normal because we are dealing with a very uncertain economic environment. And deviations like this can always be explained when one analyzes the data. Per the rules of the program, we will need to enter into consultations with the fund as provided by the consultation clause, so that both the government and the fund can assess what went wrong and see the way forward. President Mahama has shot himself in the foot by his rush to paint this situation as bad, and soon we will see how he recovers from it. What the president also failed to do was to inform the people of Ghana that there are other significant measures of the performance of the economy that informs the state of the nation other than inflation alone. Real GDP growth, trade balance, current account balance, and international reserves. The performance of the financial sector, among others. These are the important components of our economy. That is the real sector, the external sector, and the financial sector. The average growth in real GDP for the first 3 quarters of 2024 was 6.4%, and expected to end the year at a rate above the IMF target of 4%. This trend outperformed all projections and revised projections by both the IMF and the World Bank. If this is bad by President Mahama's standard, see the president's previous record. In 2016, the economy grew by 3.4%. It was 4% the year before. And so if you call 6.4% bad, how about 3.4%, ladies and gentlemen? He underperformed by all standards, whilst President Akufo-Addo overperformed. The trade balance also shows a significant economic improvement, maintaining a surplus trend since 2017, ending 2024 with a surplus of 5.9% of GDP. If this is bad economy, let's consider President Mahama's record of a deficit of 2% of GDP. Surplus 5.9% of GDP at the end of 2024, compared with a deficit 2% of GDP at the end of 2016. The current account balance also ended 2024 with a surplus of 4.2% of GDP, the very few times in recent history to have a surplus current account. And such a surplus tells us of the strength of the external payments positions of the country. Throughout the history of when President Mahama was in office, and without any confluence of crisis as faced by the previous NPP government, the current account was consistently in deficit, and it ended 2016 with a deficit of 3.1% of GDP. So again, let's compare 4.2% surplus by the end of 2024 against 3.1% deficit by the end of 2016. Gross international reserves measure the resilience of the economy, particularly in times of crisis, and how prepared the country is to weather external shocks and vulnerabilities. The Bank of Ghana has, through novel innovations, accumulated high levels of reserves, the largest in our history, with $8.9 billion. This is 4 months of import cover, above the IMF's 3 months of import cover. The NDC left office in 2016 with gross international reserves of $6.2 billion, or 3.5 months of import cover. Again, 4 months of import cover versus 3.5 months of import cover. Who is better managing the economy of Ghana? Ladies and gentlemen, the true state of our nation is that economic growth has rebounded strongly. The external sector is impressive, and our resilience towards shocks and external vulnerability is at all-time high. This is the true state of our economy, but the President and his government has a different understanding of what a strong economy means. President Mahama again cited the headline inflation of 23.8% and the 19% rate of depreciation of the cedi for 2024 as indicators of a badly managed economy. It's important to provide context to this. Following the COVID-19 and supply shocks globally, prices of food and other essentials increased substantially as indicators of the badly managed. Even in the advanced countries, inflation averaged 7%, very high for countries that are used to 1% or less inflation. The causes of this rise in inflation globally were not far-fetched. For example, COVID-19 slowed down the world economy due to lockdowns and the closure of factories and offices, including major port facilities across the world. And this adversely impacted global supply chains. Also, many countries implemented fiscal stimulus to revive economic activity. However, faced with supply constraints, the increased demand resulting from the fiscal stimulus led to higher inflation. To control inflation, the central banks of many countries, led by the advanced economies, resorted to monetary tightening by increasing rates. This led to significant investment reversals from small open economies like Ghana, weakening our currency and fueling the rise in inflation. This, together with imported inflation, pushed Ghana's inflation sharply to 54% by the end of 2022. The current rate of 23% therefore means that inflation was halved within a year, and we were working to bring it further down to the pre-COVID level of 8 plus or minus 2% by 2026. Whilst 23% is still high, the effort to bring it down from 54% has been significant. It must be noted that Before COVID-19 struck the world, the MPP demonstrated a record in inflation management. We brought inflation down from 15.4% in 2016, handed over to us by President Mahama, to 11.8% in 2017, 9.4% in 2018, 7.9% in 2019. Inflation for 2 successive years remained a single digit, the largest period in our recent economic history. The effect of the pandemic began to be felt from 2020, when inflation rose to 10.4% in 2020, 12.6% in 2021, and then to 54% at the peak of the global economic crisis in 2022. Even laymen can understand this. How the current managers of the economy cannot understand this can only be born out of political dishonesty. The adverse circumstances the MPP administration faced were unprecedented, but such did not exist when President Mahama's government achieved headline inflation of 15.4%, above the target of 10.1% in 2016. We know that there is an inverse relationship between inflation and the strength of a currency. A higher depreciation of the currency will automatically pass through to inflation in developing economies like Ghana. This means that inflation will also be higher, and the reverse also holds. Therefore, following the sharp depreciation of the cedi in 2022 by 50%, inflation was also going to rise sharply. This strong pass-through would naturally be a major challenge for the managers of the economy. By reducing the rate of depreciation to 19% in 2024, we have seen the mooting of the pass-through to inflation, and these efforts cannot be glossed over. These efforts by the previous administration and the favorable results produced should be appreciated by President Mahama and improved for even better outcomes for our people. These effective efforts should not be disregarded and belittled for political reasons. As a country, we gain nothing by this kind of politics. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to note that the rate of 6.5% depreciation we have witnessed year to date in 2025 is not informed by any sustainable strategies by the current government. The current disparity between inflation and the rate of depreciation is evidence of heavy central bank intervention on the market. The Mahama administration and the central bank can do this, but this is happening only because the previous administration left a gross international reserve of $8.9 billion by the end of 2024. This is being used to shore up the value of the cedi. The president deliberately, as you know, avoided this in his statement. Fellow Ghanaians, the true state of the nation is that exchange rate stability, which we saw before the end of 2024, and which has continued into the first quarter of this year, is not by any magic from the Mahama government. It is because the Akufo-Addo government left significant levels of international reserves for them. In addressing the issue of buffers created to support expenditure and maturing debt obligations, the president focused on the sinking fund as if it is the only source of buffers. The sinking fund is just one of our buffers. At each point in time, the government designates some accounts for buffer and for purposes of special payments. In the last 8 years, such accounts included the sinking fund, the Eurobond proceeds account, the IMF proceeds account, and the Treasury Main 2 account. For example, the IMF third review disbursement of $360 million was done on 2nd December 2024, but this was kept as buffer, part of which was used to pay coupons amounting to $346 million to Eurobond holders on 3rd January 2025. This was not done from the sinking fund. Similarly, in October 2024, we paid $520 million to our Eurobond holders for the first coupons and other fees. But again, this was not done from the sinking fund. How could we have done these payments if we didn't have buffers? Yet the president thinks that the only buffers we have is the single fund. The NPP also left significant amount of buffers, more than 5 billion Ghana cedis from the 2024 revenue collected by GRA in the Treasury Main 2 accounts, which the new government has used. Yet the president failed to talk about it and focus only on the single fund. On the financial sector, ladies and gentlemen, the president again played to the gallery by stating that, and I quote, the financial sector continues to struggle despite the previous government reportedly spending 29.9 billion Ghana cedis on the financial sector. Despite the previous government reportedly spending 29.9 billion Ghana cedis on the financial sector. Typical of MDC's usual sweeping statements is exercise.